Good afternoon, Ruby.
Hello.
I checked the registration. We have 10 people who said they would be participating in this training. I'm going to share my screen. Try to set up. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. All right, we're going to begin about 3:02. People will be joining us. Let's see, I want to. Welcome, Samantha. Welcome, Maddie. We're going to get started at 3:02. Give people another minute or so to get connected. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Okay, I think we're going to get started. Good afternoon, friends. My name is Lloyd Schmeidler. I'm a senior analyst in the Community Development Department of the City of Durham, and I am your facilitator trainer this afternoon for this Durham's Youth Point in Time Count training. And please note the session is being recorded. Ruby Holmes, our coordinator for our homelessness team, will be posting this recording to the Durham COC website later, probably tomorrow or first thing Monday, so that other volunteers can also view it. Also, there's quite a bit of material I've got prepared, so I'd ask you to, perhaps you have some paper to take notes. Please feel free to write down questions. Some of the questions may be answered later in the training, but we will have hopefully time at the end of the session for Q&A and try to get done by 4:30. Thanks again for joining us for this training. So our agenda is kind of in 4 parts. We're going to do what we call PIT Count 101, talking a little little background, some FAQs about point in time counts, what they're about, and what the youth count specifically is about as well. Big part of the training is the second agenda item, your role as volunteers, introductions to surveying and interviewing. A few kind of survey practice. We're not having opportunities to actually practice conducting the surveys. We do invite you to consider perhaps practicing with someone in the next few days before you actually start interviewing to see how the surveys that are in the online app are structured and to become familiar with the various questions. And then we'll end with some kind of nuts and bolts of the logistics of the point in time count. Okay, so point in time is sometimes often abbreviated as the PIT count, and it's simply an annual count of persons experiencing homelessness. We count people who are in shelters specifically for people experiencing homelessness, and we also work to count people who are living in unsheltered situations where ordinarily the human person should not be staying, because those kind of situations are dangerous for human health and well-being. And part of Durham's PIT count this year is also counting housing insecure or housing unstable young people to better understand their needs and get a better sense for what is happening with young people and housing security in Durham. PIT counts happen nationally across the United States in the last 10 days of January. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. But it is going to be happening all over the country as we move to the latter part of January. So why do we do PIT counts? A couple of reasons given on this slide. It's good to measure trends and changes in homelessness on the local and national level. We have seen in Durham, particularly since the pandemic, for example, with the PIT count we did in 2020 as well as 2021, between 2020 and 2021, we did see a significant increase in unsheltered homelessness. A lot of it has to do with a lot of pressure on the housing market, with a lot of people moving to Durham. People are being displaced, and our system, our community is not able to get people back into housing that they can afford at the same rate as people are losing housing. So there's a lot of pressure on that. Then there's also the idea that it helps us better understand what resources we need and to strategize the best ways to use them to end homelessness. We have received with the pandemic a lot of federal funds to address homelessness in the Durham community, and communities around the country have as well. And we need to figure out how we can best use them to help the people who are experiencing homelessness, because I think we're agreed that it's not helpful to anybody for people to be experiencing homelessness. And finally, it is a federal regulation and a requirement that if we want federal funds to help address homelessness in our community, and we get in an average year, not counting all of the funding that has come to Durham because of the pandemic, prior to that, we were getting perhaps about $2 million a year specifically dedicated for shelter, rapid rehousing, and permanent supportive housing for people experiencing homelessness. So that is a requirement. So breaking that open a bit more to talk about why we're doing a youth point in time count. It was an option in a federal funding application we completed in 2021, and we agreed that we would do it. It again helps us improve our understanding of the nature and extent of youth homelessness and housing insecurity in Durham. We typically have not seen minor children unaccompanied by a parent or guardian in the homeless population, although there are some communities certainly where you'll have 15 or 16 or 17-year-olds that are out on the streets by themselves. There is a shelter in Raleigh, Haven House, for that population. We don't have a specific youth shelter in Durham, but nevertheless, we want to continue to pay attention to what's happening with young people, especially as they age out of the foster care system. Many times they have a difficult time transitioning successfully to independent, stable living situations in young adulthood. And related to that, we want to improve our services, for youth experiencing homelessness, working with our youth service provider community, help them be aware of what's going on with youth, and then strengthen our engagement with people like you and youth themselves to pay attention to the needs of young people in our community. Right slide. Okay. So earlier slide talked about the sheltered count briefly. Shelters are specifically dedicated to provide emergency situations, emergency shelter for people experiencing homelessness, keeps them out of the elements. Durham has been challenged during the pandemic to provide adequate emergency shelter space. Due to the pandemic, we had to reduce capacity in our emergency shelter system. We're using some non-congregate shelter, but even with non-congregate shelter and other additional congregate shelter, we don't have the capacity that we did prior to the pandemic. But in terms of counting people for the point in time count, the good news is that we have a common database called a Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, in which all of Durham's providers that are part of our system are using the HMIS to record the numbers of people on a daily basis and record that they're staying at the shelter. So it's easy to do a sheltered count from the HMIS because you just run a daily report and it's automated. And the good news is that the majority of total persons counted and reported in Durham are found in shelters. They're not literally homeless. There are communities across the country where 50%, 60% of the people that are homeless are living on the streets or in unsheltered situations. That's not the case in Durham. Probably more than about a third of the people in Durham who are literally homeless or living in unsheltered situations are unsheltered. The unsheltered count, these are some locations where people who are considered literally homeless on the night of a count are found. And oftentimes outside of the pandemic, we would seek to interview people in the middle of the night when they're bedded down for the night in these kind of locations to confirm that they are homeless on that night. The youth count, in addition to working on an unsheltered count, which is going to be taking place on the night of January 26th, we are focusing our youth count on January 28th and 29th to bring in the idea of housing instability or housing unstable youth. And these are some locations where youth who are experiencing housing instability might be staying, or the reality of their housing history. They could be frequently moving from place to place. Sometimes that's called couch surfing, depending how frequently it is. There might be youth that are having trouble paying the rent. We have partnerships with Durham Tech, with NC Central University, and we know there are college students who are going to college, working to complete their education, who are needing to take advantage of food pantries at these institutions of higher learning. And so they're struggling to make ends meet. And some of those youth may be not only seeking food assistance, they also might be needing housing assistance as they work to continue their education. Or they could be living in uncrowded, overcrowded situations, maybe with other family members or other youth. Frequently, people will live together in homes or apartments that are accommodating more people than the apartment was intended for, but it is a way for people to reduce the cost of the housing on a per person basis, right? To put more people in there, the cost per person is somewhat less. Or they could be staying with relatives. Perhaps they've been estranged from their parents, but they're staying with an aunt or uncle or with their grandparents, and that may or may not be working out for the long term, but it's what they're doing at the moment. So our youth point in time count is, we want to do the best we can to make sure we're counting unsheltered youth who are actually in literal homeless situations. And we want to interview as many youth as we can to see if there are housing unstable youth that we can identify and interview in some of the locations where we think they might be at least interacting with others during the times of the count. So a couple of FAQs. It's how do we go about conducting a count, whether we're talking about unsheltered or housing instability. Well, we do brief interviews with the young people who might be experiencing housing instability or homelessness using a survey form or using a mobile application, which I think everybody on this call has already received a link to, or some instructions on how to download the mobile app that we'll be using called Counting Us. And it's pretty user-friendly, I think. We've used it at least in 2020. We didn't use it last year because we had accommodations because of the pandemic, but it works pretty well for our community. And we'll get to the specifics of what information is collected and how to have conversations to collect in the year roll section here in a little bit. Some people often would prefer to have a count in the middle of summer, where it's not as challenging to get out into the community and to be concerned about people staying warm. And our federal partners at the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development have looked at this question for many years, and they're continuing to ask us to do it in the last 10 days of January, primarily because of that third bullet that our federal government believes that each community is likely maximizing its resources to serve people's needs during the winter time. So it provides a better picture of who's unable to access emergency shelter or other crisis response assistance. In some communities, for example, during the summertime, more people might be in unsheltered situations, but it's obviously more difficult to count people in an unsheltered situation than it is when they are in a shelter, whether you're using a homeless management information system or some other method. If you're simply doing a survey, you kind of know how many people are in the shelter at that time or on that night, and you can easily count that number. So so that's a big reason, I think, number three. And then the idea of counting it at the end of the month is also addressed in bullet 4, where some people in some communities may be using some resources. We are aware that there are some literally homeless people who are unsheltered who will panhandle, beg from the community perhaps you've encountered some of those individuals, and those individuals sometimes will pool their money together, 3 or 4 of them, and maybe rent a hotel room for the night, once a week, or maybe they stay in a motel for a few days at the beginning of the month, while they're receiving their public benefits. But when those run out, they're back on the street. So that's kind of a thumbnail ideas. So that was kind of a brief introduction to the idea of PIT counts. We can talk about that a bit more, but I want to continue with a section on your role, where we're getting into the nitty-gritty of actually interviewing and counting. These are some quick tips, and I think while those of you who are interviewing may not interview someone who is literally homeless, you may. And if you do encounter a youth who is experiencing housing instability, they're still under some stress, right? If they're unsure as to exactly where they're going to spend the night, or how long they can stay with the people they're currently with, it's a challenging, it's a difficult kind of situation. And so just remember, you're asking some very sensitive questions, and you always want to lead with respect for the person you're speaking with, and respect for their human dignity. They're a member of the human community, and we generally sense that it's a tragedy that they're experiencing homelessness. It's not what we'd prefer for them, and we're trying to create a community where people don't experience homelessness. Also, everyone has the right to refuse to answer any or all of your questions. People are invited to complete the survey that we're making available, but I would think a fair number of people, again, depending on what part of town you're in, or what's going on in people's lives, I think a fair number of people are going to refuse to answer questions. I don't know about you, but a lot of times it's difficult to engage a stranger. One thing we will be providing all of the volunteers, and we mentioned again, is you'll be getting a reflective vest that's particularly helpful at night, but even during the day, it'll be a vest that clearly stands out and identifies you as someone who is not just an average shopper on the street at 9th Street or at the mall, but that you are standing out deliberately to kind of engage people and strike up a conversation with strangers, which can be challenging. And again, I think a fair number of people are going to say no, but hopefully many people will also say yes and take a few minutes, particularly I think at the downtown bus station, when people are between buses, they may have 10, 15, 20 minutes, a half hour, and not have anything else necessarily to do. So it can be a good time to engage them and complete surveys. You want to ask all the questions unless the person has already given the answer to the question over the course of the conversation. Someone volunteers at the beginning or as you're introduced, volunteers that they are a veteran. When you get to that question in the survey, you don't need to obviously ask that. We really want to encourage you to always ask questions as they are written in the mobile app itself. Do not ask questions in a way that shows you think you already know the answer. For example, this is an important one, is ask, how do you identify your gender? Do not assume that you know the answer to that. An assumption based on appearance could be wrong, right? And so, again, it's respecting people's dignity. These questions have been developed by researchers over many years, and approved by our federal partners at Housing and Urban Development, and we need to respect them. And we know that there are transgender youth, there are gay and lesbian youth in the community, and we want to respect them based on their human dignity as well. And so there's all kinds of reasons that we want to just approach people with sensitivity, with care, and with a lot of respect. If you've downloaded the Counting Us app already, you may have noticed in the Durham, there are two options, right? There's the basic pit count demo site, and then there's with the Durham 2022 link, you should be able to access these 5 options. The survey that we want our volunteers to use is simply entitled Unsheltered Homeless Survey 2022. You'll ordinarily use this one with everyone who agrees to be surveyed. You'll also notice, I think the first question after the GPS kind of automatically identifies the location of where the survey is being conducted. An early question is whether you're interviewing an individual or a household. And you may have situations where you encounter 2 people together, and you'll need to clarify before you get very far into this survey whether they are presenting themselves as a couple or they're just 2 friends who are together for the day, but they're basically would be interviewed separately. And obviously you could also encounter a young parent or 2-parent family with children. And again, that would be a situation where you would interview them as a household. The survey in the mobile app is designed that when you indicate that you're interviewing a household, you can indicate how many people are in the household. And when you do that, when you complete one person's survey, and it'll take you automatically after you submit that, it'll take you back to the survey for the second and third and fourth person in the household until everyone has been interviewed. And even with children, parents can provide the answers for their children. Most of the questions for children will simply be around basic demographics. The second survey is what's called the known locations survey. This is helpful in some communities for identifying like encampments for unsheltered people in particular, where they can use it to perhaps what's called extrapolate how many people are in the camp without counting everyone. So we're not using that survey in Durham. You may have opportunities to use the Unsheltered Homeless Person Observation Survey. You can use it when you believe a person is homeless or you believe they are in some way housing unstable. Probably, I would think you'd want to have maybe talk to your team lead, make a group decision as to whether you should do an observation survey for someone who does not appear to really be homeless, but you want to include them. But for example, if you encounter someone at the downtown bus station who is sleeping and they look to be in the youth age group, you may want to complete an observation survey for that person. The Sheltered Homeless Person Survey, please do not use that. It is available in the application for situations in which we have some small shelters, or like the VA hospital emergency room might have some homeless veterans spending the night there kind of on an emergency basis, and we could use the homeless person survey there. We'll talk further a little bit when we get into the steps to completing a survey here in a couple minutes about the reunification survey. This is a second survey that would be used after there's a yes response in the Unsheltered Homeless Survey 2022 to a question about miracle messages. And again, if you've already been in the, taking a look at the surveys, you may have noticed that question. We'll talk further about it in a minute. So kind of a step-by-step guide to conducting interviews. First, obviously, is to not shout at people, but while maintaining a certain social distance due to the COVID and the prevalence of it in the community. To say to people, do you have a few minutes? And you can speak up a little bit, right? Introduce yourself. Got a couple of slides here with some examples of things to say at the beginning. Hi, my name's Lloyd. We're out here trying to talk to young people about their housing situation. Do you have a few minutes to respond to a few questions about where you hang out at night? And one of the key questions is, where did you sleep on Wednesday night, January 26th? That is a very important question because that helps us determine whether they were literally homeless or whether they were housing unstable or not. The housing instability question is kind of determined by follow-up questions to where they slept on that night. For example, if they slept in an apartment, some follow-up questions are around how long did they stay there, or have they been staying there, and how many moves have they had over the last year or two or three. That kind of thing helps us gauge their housing instability. But the question, where did you sleep on Wednesday night, January 26th, is a really key question to bear in mind. Again, some people, perhaps most of them, are going to say, no, please don't bother me. They're going to move on because they're, really shopping, or they need to catch the next bus, or they're just, want to maintain their privacy for the day. But there are some people. It's one of the reasons we're encouraging and recruiting young people, is that we know a young person on the streets is more likely to say yes to another young person who asks them to respond to a survey than if they are approached by someone who's obviously as old as I am. We appreciate your willingness to participate and assist with this. Whatever age you are, it's helpful. But clearly, you don't want to sneak up on or startle people in any way. Again, that's one of the advantages of having the reflective vests, is that you'll be easily recognizable and standing out in some way from the normal crowds of people that might be out and about on a Friday or Saturday afternoon or evening. And clearly, and certainly after dark, do not shine flashlights in people's faces to get their attention. That's probably a sure way to make sure you don't get an interview, right? Maintain eye contact if possible, and an open stance. Use a tone of voice that's approachable. Speak slowly, be polite, don't shout. So some basics, again, of just kind of getting people's attention, letting them know that, yeah, you'd like to have a brief conversation with them, at least give them a chance to say no, they're not interested in the interview, but also hopefully some would. Then step 2 is to explain what you're doing and get their consent. Here's another example of way to start. Want to explain what we're doing. We're trying to get an idea of what's going on with young people in the Durham community, especially a sense for how many housing unstable youth there are. And we're also trying to make sure with this specific youth count to make sure that in our unsheltered count, we're not missing large groups of transition age youth, 18 to 24-year-olds in particular, who we don't find in our regular unsheltered counts. Typically in the regular literally homeless counts that we have been doing over the last several years, the number of unsheltered young people in the 18 to 24-year-old age group have been, I think less than 10. Well, if through this youth count, if we, encountered 30 youth that said they were literally homeless, they were sleeping in a car or in the woods or in a tent somewhere on the night of January 26th, that would be a significant change from what we counted in 2021 or 2020. So that would be a big shift that would certainly want to be aware of. Explain that in return for answering, they'll receive not some personal care items, but we have a $10 gift card to a local fast food restaurant, as well as some snacks and a bottle of water. And those will be made available. We'll talk some more about that when we get to the logistics section. But so I don't think we're going to have any personal care items per se. We may have, I think the packet may have some hand sanitizer during the pandemic, but it'll be some snacks, and hopefully the $10 gift card will be something that attracts people's attention, and that, when people initially say no, a good response might be, well, if you have the time to complete a survey, we will provide a package here with a $10 gift card to a local restaurant or local fast food restaurant. So, and obviously if they consent to answering your questions, continue with the interview. If they don't, say thanks anyway, have a great day, that kind of thing, and move on to the next person. Thirdly, conduct the interview using the survey again in the mobile app. Go through each question. Remind people that on any particular question, they can say pass. If they prefer not to answer, they don't have to answer all questions, even though they're, agreeing to complete the survey. So, and there are, throughout the survey, there's one section I know because I've reviewed it where it introduces a section by saying we're getting into some sensitive questions here, and feel free to say pass if you prefer to not answer any of these questions. And then at the end of the survey, be reminded that there's a section at the end of the survey to add any notes about the person, and here's an example of something that you may want to write down in the notes section if he's thought there's some discrepancy between what they're saying and your sense for what's going on. Closing the interview, again, you want to thank the person for their time. Some people may ask for additional assistance. We're not distributing any kind of resource guides, again, largely due to the pandemic, trying to limit the amount of contact that the volunteers have with people, at least physical contact, but certainly feel free to refer them to 211 if you're unfamiliar with 211. It basically is a system that operates a lot like 911, which is used for emergency assistance, right? If you're having a safety emergency or a medical emergency, people call 211 to get emergency assistance. 211 is not for emergency assistance, but it is more along the lines of for social assistance of some kind, housing assistance, financial assistance, counseling assistance, things like that. It can be helpful for people who are maybe wondering how to deal with a situation of domestic violence, or just the operators at 211 can help guide people to appropriate resources in the Durham community, that community resources that can help them. And again, any incentives your team has to offer. Now, if you do such a good job interviewing people and you run out of a supply of incentives of gift cards and snacks, etc., that we make available to your team. Obviously, you don't have those to offer, but hopefully you can. And then step 5 would be simply to record what you heard and observed. Take a few minutes before starting the next interview to make sure that you've added any notes that you want to in the notes section at the end of the survey. Any details. Again, the survey is going to automatically towards the very beginning indicate the location where the survey took place. It has a GPS function. So I've got a call coming in here, and I'm going to decline that survey. Decline that call, I should say. And you and the person will be recommending that you do surveys together. So with one person kind of engaging the person in conversation and the other person largely focused on getting the correct buttons in the mobile application survey completed and pushed to record the answers correctly. Just a couple slides about the observation surveys. Again, they're somewhat similar insofar as, unless the person is sleeping and you want to do an observation survey might be completed for someone who refuses, says they're not interested in completing the full survey, but you have a sense that they are perhaps experiencing some housing instability, and so you want to complete a survey to indicate that. You can do that in the observation survey. If you do an observation survey, these are kind of the key ideas would be to write down as much detail in the notes section. There's some limited demographic information. Again, with an observation only survey, you would be assuming what the sex or gender of the person is. You'd be indicating their observed race or ethnicity. I think there's also a section where you can indicate your sense for their age, whether they're a younger or older person, that kind of thing. Do an estimate, a guesstimate. You don't need to be one of those folks who do that at the state fair. So it's kind of interesting how those guys do a good job at the state fair guessing people's weight and age. But in any case, fill out the observation survey, indicate some thoughts about what the person is wearing, what the person looks like, why you weren't able to complete the survey, etc. Where you saw them is not is a question you don't really need to ask. I should say that many of these slides we adapted for Durham from a national template that was given to us to make it a little easier for us to complete this PowerPoint slide presentation. And then again, perhaps the key question would be, what makes you think that they may be experiencing homelessness or housing instability? So that's a very important question, I think, to answer in the observation only survey. Let me talk a little bit, a little longer about the Miracle Messages reunification survey. Miracle Messages, as this slide says, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. It's based in San Francisco, and it is largely using social media to help people experiencing homelessness across the U.S. rebuild their social support systems and even financial security through especially through family reunification services and phone buddy programs. This is, and basic income pilots. I think their basic income pilots are in the San Francisco area. We shouldn't be telling people, that if they sign up for reunification, they're going to get a basic income. But this is a quote from the Miracle Messages website. And if you Google Miracle Messages, you can learn more about it. So this reunification survey is available was available to us at no charge in the Counting Us app. And so the idea is that if a person says they're interested in being reunited with family that maybe they've lost touch with, they don't have a good sense for how to try to, they don't know maybe a phone number, they don't no longer have people's addresses or just are at a loss. Volunteers, generous volunteers work using, I think, largely social media to try to track down people whom people would wish to reconnect to. I think you may be familiar with some of the stories that occasionally you'll see on the news about, somebody you found. And there was a story not long ago about a person who got a used book, and they found in the used book, I think, a postcard or a picture of someone, and they posted the picture on social media in their community and invited people to spread the word that they were looking for this people in the photo. And I don't know, a month or two or three or four later, somebody saw that picture on social media and recognized who it was. And so they worked to make contact and bring the people back together, and they gave the photo back to the people, and the family that had lost the photo was very grateful to get it back. They think had cleared out some books and given them away, and hadn't leafed through them to see if there were any personal photos or things like that they wanted to hold on to. So they were happy to get it back. And it was kind of a feel-good story again about the value of social media and helping people make connections. So this is kind of a similar idea. People who agree to participate must be willing to share their personally identifying information. The reunification survey asks for first and last names, I think dates of birth, asks for pretty much as much contact information, a mailing address, a phone number if they have one. Obviously, the Miracle Messages folks need to be able to reestablish contact with this person if they are interested in getting reconnected. So for example, we may have somebody in Durham who says, yeah, I was, born and raised in Texas, and I have no way of reestablishing contact with my brother, but it'd be nice to be able to get back in touch with them. And they give you the name and, as much information as they have about a brother in Texas. So that's what the volunteers work to connect with. And certainly the Miracle Messages, if you're interested in volunteering on a longer term basis to try to help them with this worthy cause, I think there are opportunities at the Miracle Messages website to sign up to volunteer. One caveat is that this Miracle Messages resource is not appropriate for persons who are seeking to connect with former romantic partners or for spouses or anything. People have been estranged in that way, or Miracle Messages is very clear that this is not an opportunity. For example, for if there's a situation where domestic violence has occurred, they're concerned about somebody saying, yeah, I want to get back together with my former partner. So there are some questions in the survey, so you want to make sure that that the questions of the individual are yes before you go through the reunification survey. But I commend it to attention, and if there's one or two people that do complete the reunification survey through this process and then get reconnected with family or friends, that would be a great contribution to their lives. Whom to interview? We clearly want to say that it's not always possible to determine if someone is experiencing homelessness or housing instability based solely on how they look. Therefore, we're encouraging our volunteers to seek to engage as many young people as possible and anyone else whom you believe may be experiencing homelessness or housing instability. There may be some people at the bus station on Friday or Saturday who have since they may be experiencing homelessness, again, maybe because they have, a bag of belongings with them that seems kind of unusual, and you may want to approach them to see if they want to be interviewed, and certainly okay. Again, the key question for that kind of person would be, where did you sleep on January 26th? And did someone already talk to you about where you slept on January 26th? Did someone already ask you the series of questions? And, if they say no, and you have a sense that, yeah, they indeed say they were in an unsheltered situation on January 26th, you can certainly complete the homelessness survey, unsheltered homelessness survey, even if they are 30 or 40 years old. Don't feel that you need to solely concentrate on young people. You can be alert for other people who may be experiencing homelessness as well. But in terms of housing instability and this youth count, you want to pay attention to where you're seeing the person, what the person is doing. Are they walking with are they walking with purpose? And going to the grocery store, going to Starbucks or whatever? Or do you have a sense that they're kind of just walking aimlessly, hanging out? And I mean, don't let people's personal appearance be a guide as much as kind of, because depending on, again, where you are on January 28th and 29th, there may be a lot of young people, and you're going to need to pick and choose who to try to reach out to. But it's certainly okay for you to interview young people who are housing stable. That's fine too. And if you discover that in the interviews you do, that's good. Also good information for us to have. So, but I think on a consistent basis throughout your shift, you want to be trying to engage people in conversation about their housing and their housing stability. One question we often get is, should I wake someone who is sleeping? Maybe you're on 9th Street and you encounter somebody sleeping in a doorway. We would say use the observation-based form to fill out as much information about the person as you observe. Or maybe someone, again, is sleeping at the bus station or wherever in downtown Durham. And you can talk to your team leader, or if your team has a law enforcement escort, you can consult with them as well. If it's a really cold day and you think that it's dangerous for the person to continue to be in their situation, you may wish to call 911. Again, that's a decision that a team lead and law enforcement, if your team does have a law enforcement escort, would want to make. A few thoughts about your own safety. This is important as well. Um, we have not had really safety challenges with volunteers in the Durham community as when we've done use community volunteers to go out even in the middle of the night. I don't recall that we've had any significant safety issues come up. But that being said, we always want you to be with at least one other person. We're hoping to have 4-person teams where 2 people could pair up and could have two pairs of people kind of being close to each other, but interviewing people separately. So always be with at least one other person. Keep an appropriate social distance from those you are interviewing. Again, being aware of the challenges the pandemic is causing us. Maintain awareness of the space around you. This is particularly, I think, for teams that work or canvas throughout the downtown Durham area. Not so much. I think generally most of the teams are going to be in situations where there's significant numbers of people, but there is some safety in numbers when you get into a downtown alley, even at 7 or 8 p.m. on a Friday or Saturday night. Most of Durham is pretty well lit, but sometimes, again, it's good to kind of be aware of the space around you. Remain standing by and large unless you're squatting down to speak with someone who's sitting or lying down on the ground, and again, stay in places that are lit for the most part. And if you use a flashlight, do so respectfully. Again, if you don't feel safe approaching someone or going somewhere, don't go. We want you to be safe. Some people, if they are in need, may be asking you for an extra $1 or $2. We discourage that. Do not share your address, phone number, or other personal information with people being surveyed. Again, if people are asking for additional assistance, encourage them to call 211. You can ask them if they're seeking additional assistance. You can ask them if they want to speak further to the law enforcement officer. And if they do, fine. If they don't, that's fine too. Sometimes the law enforcement might be willing to follow up with people at another time. But if they do solicit for money, tell them, I'm sorry, I don't have money for you today. It's not to say, you may not have any money on your person or in your purse or at that time, but it is to say, I'm sorry, I don't have money to give you today. And you can also acknowledge again, if there still are gift cards available, that you will be giving them a gift card for a local fast food restaurant if they complete the survey. So that's really important. Maybe it goes without saying that you shouldn't transport anyone in a personal vehicle, but we'll say it. Please don't do that. And then follow any instructions from your team lead or the law enforcement officer who may accompany your team. Let me say a word. We are working closely with the crisis intervention team at the Durham Police Department to identify officers who will be shadowing the teams or accompanying them, meeting you in the location. We'll be working to have the team leads contact the law enforcement officer who's going to be working with the team. We're not sure at this point whether we're going to have enough officers available to have an officer with every team throughout both Friday and Saturday. We're going to try to prioritize, especially trying to get officers for the evening shifts on both days. But that remains to be seen. We hope to have an officer for every team, but we won't know that until probably Wednesday or Thursday of excuse me, Wednesday or Thursday of next week. But we're trying to, and so. But again, your team lead, many of the team leads will have had experience with assisting with a point in time count in the past, and so they'll have I think a good sense for how your team should operate, especially to maintain safety. We also need to be concerned about the safety of those whom you are interviewing, right? So especially if it's cold outside, get a sense for whether people have enough layers of clothing on them to keep them warm. Make sure they're dry. If someone seems to be in a dangerous situation, again, as a team, work with your team lead, decide if you should call 911 and ask for, again, especially if you don't have a law enforcement officer with you, decide as a team with your team lead whether you want to call 911 and ask a law enforcement officer to come and check on someone who might be in a dangerous situation. It's one of the functions of law enforcement in our community as well. Okay. So these are some additional tips. I think we're doing pretty well on time here. Again, be respectful, somewhat repetitious as some of the things we've talked about in the last 40 or so minutes. Maintain social distance, seek conversation with those in the 16 to 26-year-old age group, more or less. Introduce yourself and inquire about willingness to complete a youth survey about their housing. Again, we're inviting you on some level to practice being an extrovert more than an introvert, right? It's sometimes a challenge for many of us to approach strangers, but again, you'll have a best, and it's a good opportunity to practice introducing yourself to others who don't know you. And as you reflect on the experience, you can reflect on what your feelings were like doing that. And more than likely, as you do it throughout the shift, it'll become more comfortable for you. The first couple might be particularly challenging, and you maybe want to start with having someone who's done it before, have them do it, and then you can do it, and you can switch off, and it's okay. I mean, the only way we meet new people is by introducing ourselves to new people, right? So when you're in a new class at school or in a new work environment, we introduce ourselves to each other, generally by name. We don't necessarily get into all the specifics that these surveys do in a brief amount of time, but it's part of being part of the community is to develop some comfort with being able to introduce ourselves to strangers and engaging in conversation with them. And kind of the survey is essentially a structured conversation. Again, survey administration, we're recommending a two-person approach where one person maintains more eye contact with the person, engages them more closely in conversation, while the other second person is recording responses in the mobile application. Now, if you want to, we're not set up at this point to do this, and although there's a new thought I'm thinking through, I may give copies of one or two copies of a written copy of the survey questions to the team leads when they pick up supplies, just so that the person actually engaging the person with in conversation can more easily maintain eye contact and have a sense for what the next questions are in the survey than having to go back and forth from the mobile app or engage with the second person. So maybe if during our Q&A time, we can talk further about that, that option and get a sense for whether you think that would be helpful. And again, meeting person at their physical level sometimes can be helpful, particularly if you're outside, if there's, if they're sitting on a park bench or somewhere, feel free to join them on the bench and introduce yourself. Again, with maintaining social distance, we're generally not encouraging, or I guess we would be discouraging people from shaking hands in that way due to the pandemic. Some pit count dues. Do get consent before asking survey questions. Have a conversation with the people you're introducing, with people you're interviewing. Introduce sensitive questions with reminders that they need not answer every question. Again, the survey in the mobile app does that in the sensitive questions section, but it's a good thing to remind people, to say, these next several questions are getting into some sensitive topics, so feel free to say pass if you'd prefer to not answer any of these questions, and respect people's times. But we're estimating that, a good conversation on all these questions, you can get through the youth survey, it's probably going to take 10 to 15 minutes, again, depending how much small talk you get into with the individuals you're interviewing. Some don'ts. Don't take personal photos of people. If they have a cell phone and want a photo of you with them, if you want to do a selfie with them, again, use your best judgment. Maybe talk to your team lead. Could be okay. What can a person do with your photo if it's in their cell phone? Wouldn't recommend taking a selfie with them on your phone and then trying to get it to them, because then that gives them your contact information in some way. Don't ask questions in a way that assumes you know the answer. We've talked about that already and how important that is. Ask the questions as they are listed on the survey, particularly around gender and sexual identity. Don't insert yourself into the person's story. This is something that I many times challenge myself with, and probably need to do a better job of personally not completing people's sentences with what I think they're going to say. Don't force people to answer questions they don't want to answer, and don't make promises you cannot deliver. This is a one-day survey. Don't promise that you'll meet people again the next day to take them to lunch or whatever. Tell them we have some snack bags to give you and a gift card, and it's a one-time meeting. This is a time for any of you who may have completed or participated in a point in time count, whether it's been in Durham or somewhere else. We have one slide here. If you want to unmute yourself and want to respond to any of these questions, we'll take a minute or two. We've got moving right along. I think we're in good shape. So any thoughts and experiences that people have had in previous point in time counts in Durham or anywhere else that you want to share? Okay, well, maybe we'll come back to it at the end. Moving into the last section on logistics. Again, COVID and safety. Stay with your count team. Maintain social distance from team members and interviewees as much as you can. know, the nation in Durham are experiencing a real spike, a real surge with the pandemic, with the Omicron variant. Getting, I think on average for the last week, we're over 1,200 cases a day in Durham. But gratefully, I think we are asking, have asked that all of our volunteers have been fully vaccinated, and hopefully, I think most of them, if not all, have been received the booster as well. We will be supplying personal protective equipment, a mask, I think an N95 mask for all volunteers. Please wear it throughout your shift, and use hand sanitizer after each distribution of personal care items as well. This disease, it's, we're still nationwide, experiencing over 1,000 deaths a day because of COVID-19. So it's a serious illness that we need to take seriously, while continuing to live our lives, and that's part of the challenge of these times. But hopefully, we'll get through it and reach a point where we don't need to wear masks all the time whenever we're out in public. But we encourage you to do that during these times. There are more COVID tests. We're in a period where the availability of COVID tests is somewhat of a challenge. If you have already ordered COVID tests through covidtest.gov and you want to take a COVID test in the days leading up to the count next Friday and Saturday, certainly feel free to do that. And certainly if you test positive, send me an email saying, I'm COVID positive, so I can't participate in the count. That's certainly fine. And certainly please stay home if you have any COVID symptoms on the day of your scheduled shift. Again, it'd be helpful if that happens to communicate at least to your team lead and to me as well, so that we can be aware of that and we can send you good wishes for good health. And hopefully nobody does experience or contract COVID as a result of your participation in the count. But monitor yourself over the 2 weeks following to for any COVID symptoms, and get health care as you may need it. Obviously, you're going to need your cell phone or a tablet to complete the surveys online. Let me say a word. I haven't mentioned kind of what happens to these surveys after you submit them. So they go into an online database. After you submit a survey, it's no longer accessible to you. You can at the end of the survey, you can save it as a draft. For example, if you say you want to write some notes on a particular survey, but there's someone else you want to interview at that very moment, they've made good contact, you want to get an interview started, so you want to postpone writing some notes for a survey, you can go back to surveys when they are still in draft form. But once you click a submit button, it's no longer going to be accessible to you. It is going to be accessible to people in what's called the command center, which is my office, where I'll be able to go in and see all of the surveys that have been submitted by the various volunteers, and count up how many youth were surveyed and how many were housing unstable, et cetera, et cetera. So please, you're welcome to keep the Counting Us app on your cell phone or mobile device after the survey if you wish, or you can delete it. If you think you may want to participate in future surveys in Durham or elsewhere, you may want to hold on to it, but ordinarily, I think it's only pretty much useful for a point in time count. And Durham has a limited time for our community to use the command center and to actually use the surveys that are in the Durham 2022 section or database. So that's, after a period of time, is I think after about 30 or 60 days, is no longer going to be accessible to us as well. So if you would open up the app, for example, in May, you're probably not going to find Durham 2022 or Durham point in time count surveys on the Counting Us app. You'll still find the demo, which anyone can access at any time. So bring your identification just in case it's needed in some way. If you're counting after dark, if you're doing an evening shift, we encourage people to bring a headlight or a flashlight. Be comfortable, wear appropriate weather for the weather, whatever it is next week. We hope it'll be warmer and have better weather than we're slated to get in Durham tomorrow. We did have a question in a meeting we were in yesterday about what happens if we have poor weather next week. I think if there's any indication that we will need to postpone the point in time count because of the weather, we will certainly get an email out to all of the volunteers. If not on Wednesday, I will say we'll make a commitment to let you know by noontime on Thursday whether or not we're planning to postpone the count on Friday and Saturday because of the weather. But be comfortable, be warm. Whistles and water bottles, snacks are optional. We will provide a safety vest again from our office, and that will be important. Again, official pit count date, Wednesday. Youth count dates are January 28th and 29th from 1:30 to 8 p.m. with 2 shifts. We may ask some volunteers to do 2 shifts. Some people will do 1 shift Friday and 1 shift Saturday. It really depends on how many volunteers we get. The team lead responsibilities, some of you on this call may be team leads, and you have some important responsibilities. You will need to communicate where to meet your assigned team members at the start of the shift, via email or phone 20 to 24 hours before the assigned shift. And I'll be communicating those assignments probably by the end of the day on Tuesday of next week, or probably maybe at the latest on Wednesday by noontime. I'll be communicating to team leaders what their assigned area of town is, as well as who are the members of their team. Again, we're looking to have maximum of 4-person teams. So the team lead would have him or herself plus 3 other volunteers. The team leads pick up reflective vests at 516 Rigsby Avenue, which is the offices of the city's Community Development Department. The main entrance is right on Rigsby Avenue, across from the skateboard park downtown, if you're familiar with that area. Again, you'll want to come to that office 15 to 60 minutes before your shift, depending on what part of the community you are assigned for. People who are going to be hopefully interviewing or surveying people in South Point probably want to get to the office a good half hour to 45 minutes, if not 60 minutes before they're planning to meet their team. So you go to the team, pick up supplies at the gift bags, reflective vests, etc. At 516 Rigsby, then go to your assigned area, meet the team. I think a good thing for volunteers to look for is the person who has a reflective vest on. So a team lead would already have a reflective vest and can start wearing it and meet your team. If you don't know who your team members are, some teams are friends or acquaintances, but many of you will be on teams with people unfamiliar to you. So and then at the end of the shift, the team lead has responsibility to return the vests and any undistributed items back to me at 516 Rigsby at the conclusion of the shift. That's true even at 8 p.m. Don't go right home. Please come back to 516 Rigsby and return any unused items. One of the things not talked about here, talked some about, we are working to get one youth, hopefully more, on each team. Hopefully many of the volunteers will be young adults who will be close enough in age that young people will be certainly open to talking to them, but there'll be one at least adult team lead. We are making available a $25 gift card to thank this year's volunteers for this count. And I need to consult further with my manager specifically on how we want to distribute those to the volunteers who want them. We're offering them. If you'd prefer to not get one, that's fine too, but we're happy to make them available and are grateful for the volunteer support we're receiving. Transportation, again, team members ordinarily would travel separately to and from their designated assignment area. It's up to you if you're, again, acquaintances or friends with other team members. If you want to travel together, that's your call. I think we've talked about this, or it's in the registration site. We're coming up to the end here. 4 survey areas: 9th Street and Broad Street retail corridors, Whole Foods to Harris Teeter to Elmo's, that 9th Street area. The downtown bus station and the surrounding area, perhaps going through the American Tobacco, but largely focusing on the downtown bus station as people are coming and going throughout the day from there. And then another team will be responsible, really, they'll do, perhaps them and that team, and the 4th team in the South Point Mall area would be the people doing more walking than any of the other teams, but rotating between Central Park, the skateboard park, and the main library, again, depending on the weather of that day. And then the 4th area, South Point Mall, and the nearby retail areas can rotate through the mall, through the retail area, across Fayetteville Street, as well as getting up to the Target and the retail area up towards Target in that area. Again, we'll have snack and gift cards for those willing to complete a survey. If people are not interested in completing a survey, you indicate to them, I do have a gift card for you if you're willing to complete a survey, if those are still available. Distribute those items after the survey is completed. Obviously, thank participants for their time. And if people say, no, I'm not interested, say, well, thanks anyway, have a great day, and you can move on. Feel free to write down my cell phone number. Typically, I do not answer calls from numbers that I do not recognize, but during the youth point in time count, I will make an exception. Okay, so feel free to give me a call if you have any questions. During the count itself, if you have questions leading up to the count, please try to reach me on my office number at 919-560. I should have put that down here, 560-4570, extension 22267. But you also, I think, have my email address because you all received a invitation to this training via email from me, and I'm happy to respond to emails. But during the count itself, to reach me, I'll be at the office throughout the count, and you can reach me with this cell phone number. If you're more interested in more resources, Google HUD Exchange. You can learn more about pit counts. They have a methodology guide, a lot of resources available there. And HUD does compile the information across the country in what's called an annual homeless assessment report. And you can Google that term and you'll find lots of information about homelessness in this country. All right, we have a few minutes for questions. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions that you have written down or have come to mind as you've been patiently listening to me babble on for the last nearly hour and a half. Any questions? Certainly, I was not so clear that no one has any questions. Let me ask you this. A question?
Not a question, not a question particularly. I'm just saying, no, now, okay, now that we're actually volunteering, to do this work, like what's in it for us, for the people who are actually, volunteering.
What is in it for the people who are volunteering? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay. I indicated here at the end, we are making a $25 gift card available to thank the volunteers for their volunteer service, for their volunteer participation. I need to have further conversation with my manager as to exactly how we're going to get those gift cards to the volunteers. We may be, well, there's several options we're considering. We may be mailing them to you. We may distribute them through your team leads on the day of the count. I'm not sure just what yet. We have to finalize that plan. But if you're interested in receiving a gift card, we'll be offering a $25 gift card to volunteers who want to accept one from the city as a small gratuity and as a sign of our gratitude for your participation. Okay. Any other questions? Let me ask one or the other of you to share briefly about why you decided to volunteer for this activity. Someone be willing to share? You all are being shy. Be brave. Participating in going up to people and ask them to complete a housing survey requires a sense of bravery, right? There is a chance to practice being brave and talking to strangers.
Sure, I can share.
Thank you, Maddie.
Oh, sorry. So I'm a medical student at Duke, and I'm part of a organization called Wellnest, and we basically help people who are transitioning out of homelessness into new apartments or houses, and sort of like help them throughout that transition, and help with the actual move, like moving their physical belongings and finding additional furniture that they may need. And so someone on my team brought this opportunity to my attention, and we thought it would be a really great way to get involved at another like point in the process for people. So we wanted to help out.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks so much for sharing and volunteering. Anyone else? All right. Well, we are going to adjourn then. Thank you all very much for participating in this session. Hopefully it kept you awake and provided some meaningful information that will serve you well as you participate in this count. And we look forward to meeting some of you in person next week, and certainly grateful for everybody's participation in this count. And we'll stay in touch, and we're still looking for additional volunteers. So if you have other friends and colleagues, especially young people in that 18 to 24, 25-year-old age group, please feel free to encourage them to consider volunteering. So still would welcome additional volunteers. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe and warm, especially during this cold weather. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lloyd.
Thank you.